Welcome everyone. I'm here for time period 3 review for the APUS exam. We are on time period 1754 to 1800. And this is the broad overview, and then I did a slide for each of these. So let's make sure you understand the general chronological overview here. We start with the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. That is 1754 to 1763. If you call it the 7 Years' War, it starts in 1756. From that point, we lead to the causes of the American Revolution, 1763 to 1775. Then the shout heard around the world is the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. We then go to the Declaration of Independence, 1776. That leads to the American Revolution. We'll have a little discussion about when you want the revolution to be starting. The first form of government is called the Articles of Confederation. That is after the American Revolution. Then that gets replaced by the Constitution for 3 years, the Constitutional Convention, followed by the early Republic of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. Does anybody have any questions on anything here with the overview? All right. I don't know what you mean by we are all watching your stream during the review, because I didn't think I was streaming this live. But anyway, is everybody clear on the chronology? Somebody throw a yes there, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, that's all I needed to see. All right, so let's start with the French and Indian War, again, also known as the 7 Years' War. It is a battle between the French and the Native Americans versus the British and the colonists. The only Native American group that sided with the British were the Iroquois. They were fighting in the Ohio River Valley region. They had a little bit of a conflict between forts, and the initial stages of the French and Indian War led Benjamin Franklin to calling for a meeting. It was the Albany Plan of Union, and he wanted the colonists to agree to some form of a colonial united force. This cartoon here, Join or Die, is from this meeting, and it's a picture of a snake, and it's sliced up, and basically implying that if the colonies don't join together, there's a chance we're going to lose this war. That was early. They did not agree to any colonial government, unified government, but it set the stage for one for the future. The Prime Minister of England was William Pitt. He had promised to pay for the war when it was going on. He said to the colonists, if you volunteer, if you help out during the war, we will take care of the costs of the war. Later on, he's not in a position to follow through with that promise, and that's one of the big conflicts between the colonists and the British Parliament. The war ends with France losing considerable territory in North America, and here's what everybody should know. This is a turning point. So before the war, there were laws called Navigation Acts, but they were not well enforced. That is called salutary neglect. Now, because the British Parliament needs money to pay for the war, they're expecting the colonists to pay taxes. Salutary neglect is over. This leads to tension between the British and the colonists, even though William Pitt had made that promise. So there's your overview. Do you understand it? Do you have any questions? It's important to understand why the French and Indian War was a turning point. Before the war, they were on the same side, the British and the colonists. After the war, tensions begin. Somebody throw a question in there, or a yes, we're good, or that makes sense, or can you say it again? Or a hi. I guess a hi is not bad either. But I hope everybody's, I want to just go slide by slide. I'm trying to go slower. Was that a little bit slower, those of you that requested that? I hope so. All right. I hope you're listening and not watching TV. We are going to get to that line right now. So thank you for asking that. Great question. Great question. So is everybody clear on the French and Indian War as a turning point? Beautiful. Okay. So now we go to the causes of the American Revolution. And I'm going to add that line. Thank you, Andrew. The Proclamation of 1763 and Pontiac's rebellion. Okay, so once the war is over, and it should be the other way around, once the war is over, the British are trying to defend the colonists from what is called Pontiac's Rebellion. So after the Native Americans attacked the settlers, which was and the settlers gave them blankets with smallpox, the Parliament issues Proclamation of 1763. This says that the colonists are not allowed to go west of the Appalachian Mountains. The colonists look at it as, who is Parliament to tell us where we can and can't go? But the Parliament really believed that it was for protection, to prevent them from being attacked by Native Americans. That starts this slippery slope of all these problems that lead to the American Revolution. So thank you for reminding me of that. That's very important. The next thing is there'll be a Stamp Act, which, yes, that's the proclamation. So the Proclamation of 1763 said that the colonists could not move west of the Appalachian Mountains. But they look at it as Parliament telling them what they can do an ocean away, and it upsets them. Do you understand it? Throw me a yes in there if you can. Good. So now all you should know is that there are just a series of acts that are passed that irritate the colonists. The Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Act, the Quartering Act. I can go through them quickly. Sugar Act is just a tax on sugar. The Stamp Act probably bothered them the most because it was a tax on documents that were made inside the colony, inside all the colonies. So that upsets the colonists because it is items that they're making and they don't understand why they have to pay Parliament for playing cards or marriage license, a will. So that one bothers them the most. The Townshend Acts, that's a tax on lead, paper, paint, glass, but then the one that you really should know, tea. Tea bothers them tremendously. We'll go through it in a second. And then the Quartering Act said that you had to provide housing for the British soldiers. So all of these are just irritating the colonists. Remember, we're not going to remember every single fact. We're going to try to get the big picture. They start to chant no taxation without representation. The argument of the colonists is that you can't tax us if we don't have a representative in Parliament. Now, I will tell you that the Parliament or the British responded by saying, virtually you're represented. They used the argument, virtual representation. Since we have a representative body, virtually you have representation. But none of those people were from the colonies. One of the leading groups was the Sons of Liberty. They staged boycotts. Do you remember I told you they burned like dolls of tax collectors, or they took stamps and they stamped tax collectors all over their body? And then you have Daughters of Liberty. Those were women who would make their own clothing, so we didn't have to buy the clothing from the British. But this is just a general protesting that was taking place. I hope I'm going slow enough. Then you have a violent episode like I don't get. All right, so what do you not get? So virtual representation you've heard of like a virtual reality game. It looks like you're really involved in the game, but you know you're not. So it's called virtual reality. Virtual representation, they argued, Parliament that is, that we have a representative body. So virtually you're represented. But none of those people were elected from the colonies. So it wasn't a real representation. Does that help a little more? Beautiful. I love that. Okay. So now we go to the Boston Massacre, and that's 1770. And that is when 5 colonists were shot. They were protesting outside of a customs house, and somebody threw a rock with a snowball, and the Boston soldiers fired into the crowd, 5 people dead. That's another example of the tensions mounting. The Boston Tea Party, I would say that's the most important thing for you to know. The tea tax infuriated the colonists. Even though, I have to say, the tax on the colonists was like 1/16 the rate that the British people at home had to pay. But anyway, they dressed up the colonists as Native Americans. they stormed a ship and they dumped 342 chests of tea overboard. So now it's beyond, we're beyond any hope here. The British passed the Intolerable Acts. Again, I can go into more detail, but I don't think we have to do that right now. Severely punished Boston. All right, now these acts infuriate the colonists. So we're 1 year away from the revolution. All right, the colonists would get their tea smuggled in from, I want to say, the Dutch, which was illegal because they were only allowed to buy tea from the British East India Company. And they were smuggling it. And I think it's important to know, I know I sound like very pro-British here, but the smuggled tea was actually more expensive than the tax tea from the British. So how do you guys feel? Are you all good on this slide? All right, everybody's good? Yeah, this is such a challenge because, we spend days, if not weeks on this, and I'm doing it in 5 minutes, but this is review. And again, if you understand the big picture, you will be okay. All right, next slide. Battle of Lexington and Concord is 1775. This is known as the shot heard round the world. The debate here is what is the beginning of the American Revolution? Is this, remember, they're fighting here. People are dying in the Battle of Lexington and Concord, but the colonists haven't declared independence yet. I hope you know that will be the next slide. So you could debate that this is the beginning of the revolution, or you could say that the Declaration is the beginning of the revolution, or you could argue the French and Indian War was the beginning of the revolution. Remember, I don't know which classes I told this to, but this was a question on the first redesigned AP exam, and the quote was, "The revolution was in the minds of the people," and kids were writing, not our students, but kids were writing that the revolution didn't happen, it was just fought in their minds. That's a complete misunderstanding of what John Adams is saying. I would love an LOL in the chat, but if I don't get it, that's all right. You guys seem very serious tonight. There we go, thank you. All right, so is everybody clear on the chronology there? Beautiful. So now we get to the Declaration of Independence. And just before Jefferson wrote this, I would love for you all to know this pamphlet, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. So he published this pamphlet. He had really just arrived in the colonies a short time ago. He was from Britain. And he wrote this pamphlet claiming that it was common sense for the colonists to revolt against an unjust government. And as more people read this created more of a fervor or more momentum for people to declare independence because there was a debate. They really weren't sure if this was the right thing to do. So please be aware of that. If you remember the Enlightenment from 10th grade, the enlightened thinkers had a big impact on the Declaration of Independence. I said it was written by Thomas Jefferson. It begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And just know this, it's really just a list of their complaints. It's a list of their grievances against the British. Now that the Declaration is written and presented July 4th, now we go to the Revolution. Is everybody good on that slide? Great. All right. So now we go to the American Revolution. And for those of you who love wars, I apologize that I'm not going to be talking about any battles. But just read this paragraph. Oh, hold on. Okay. Of course I can. What would you like me to do on that slide? This must be weird for the people that are watching it later, but they have to understand we're doing this live. And then I don't know what the people like from Montana who are watching it are going to be saying. But it's interactive. So any of you that are watching this, from another school, this is how we work. We just like to ask questions and be very casual and conversational. All right. Oh, you just wanted to take a picture. I got you. All right. So you're ready now? I want us all to read this together. During and after the American Revolution, an increased awareness of inequalities in society motivated some individuals and groups to call for the abolition of slavery and greater political democracy in the new state and national governments. So to summarize, be aware that the revolution contributed to the abolitionist movement, it contributed to the movement for women's equality, and it contributed to the movement for greater political democracy, more people being able to be part of the process. And you'll see that in the early stages. The turning point battle was the Battle of Saratoga. That convinced the French to join. I should definitely put this in the slide if I can figure this out. Make sure you know that there were patriots and loyalists. So patriots supported the cause for independence and the revolution. Loyalists still supported the crown. All right, let's see who the first one can type the right answer in. Which colony had the largest percentage of loyalists? All right, you're being tested. Who will get it first? Nice job, Alyssa. Followed right behind by Kenny. Good job. New York. Excellent, excellent job. That must make you feel really good. It should. All right, are we good on the revolution slide? Beautiful. Almost done here. We only have 4 or 5 slides left. Okay, so now we go to the Articles of Confederation. All right, so this is the first written constitution for the United States. And because they just got rid of a strong central government that they didn't like, they just disposed of the British Crown, the British Parliament. Most of the power is going to belong to the 13 states. So this is a government that is very weak on the central level. Does anybody have a question on that? You're all good? All right. Here are some examples. There's no okay. So, no, George Washington is not a member of the central government yet. Great question. All right. He will be in the Constitution, not here. This is where I get myself carried away. There was no president, but the head of the Congress was. See if anybody knows that answer. That's a really tough one, though. Who the head of the Congress was. I used to refer to him as the first president. I don't expect that one. That's a tough one. His name was John Hanson. But anyway, yes, Washington and Hamilton are alive, but they're not going to be president or secretary of the Treasury yet. That will happen in a couple of years. But thank you for asking. So, all right. Oh, sorry. Somebody does not like John Hanson as the first president. Okay. Back to the Articles. The Articles do not have the power to tax. They could only request money from the states. They do not have the power to raise a military. They can only get volunteer forces. There's no uniform currency in the Articles of Confederation. And I really should have put here that this is called the critical period. So we don't know if the country's going to survive this. We are in critical condition. So these weaknesses here, in addition, no president and no Supreme Court, make the prospects of the Articles succeeding very difficult. Now, what is Shays' Rebellion? It's the best example of these weaknesses. There was a rebellion in Massachusetts, and it was because of people who were upset that the Massachusetts local government was taking their foreclosed land, their foreclosed farms. You would think that the government would just crush this rebellion. It's a bunch of farmers with pitchforks, but they were not able to do so. And it shows how weak the Articles were. Does anybody have a question on the weaknesses of the Articles? We're doing really well. I'm enjoying this very much, much more than time periods 1 and 2. Okay, so the only strengths of the Articles had to do with the settlement of land in the Northwest Territory. This is the area in Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin. They created rules and policies for how these territories could eventually become states. I won't go into every single detail, but just be aware that they charge people $1 an acre to buy the land. They reserved some land for education. They did not allow slavery. I think that's probably the most important. No slavery. Although that wasn't necessarily an abolitionist view. It might have been just the desire to keep black people out of the area. And also be aware that there were specific rules on how you could become a state. So if you get 5,000 people there, you could apply for a legislature, and 60,000 apply for statehood. These are not facts you have to memorize. Just I can't control myself sometimes. Do you have any questions on the Articles of Confederation? Somebody give me a we're good or thanks or whatever. All right, beautiful. All right, that's what I like to hear. So now we have a decision to make. Should we try to fix the Articles, or should we completely start over? And they decided to start over. So this will be your constitutional convention. All right, there's a lot here, obviously. So your constitutional convention in Philadelphia, 55 white landowning men, all in charge. And what are they going to do? They're going to come up with a couple of compromises. The first compromise is called the Great Compromise. This was between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan, and it led to two houses in Congress. So one group said representation should be based on your population. The more people we have, the more representatives we should have. That was the Virginia Plan. But then the New Jersey Plan, they said every state should have equal number of representatives. So we decided to take both. We have the House of Representatives and we have the Senate. And that is Congress. We have three branches of government. Congress is one branch of the government. Is everybody clear on the Great Compromise? This is really more actually for the regents. They wouldn't ask you this, I don't think. 3/5 compromise, you know I would love for you to remember this. 3 out of every 5 slaves counted in the population. The North did not want to count slaves, the South did. Simply because if you're counting them, it gives you more representatives in the House of Representatives. And some people argue that the 3/5 compromise also helped the South in presidential elections because we use the population to determine the number of electoral college votes. So there are people who think that Jefferson would not have been president without the 3/5 compromise. Is everybody clear on that, or do you have a question? Trying to go a little bit slower. I hope I am. But I'm also trying to keep it under 30 minutes. All right. They banned the slave trade after 20 years. That was another compromise. We still have slavery from like reproduction, but we do not import slaves from Africa after 1808. So they seem to be asking this a lot. Some people just did not like this new constitution. They thought it was giving too much power to the federal government. So they would not agree to it. The people who supported it were called Federalists. So the people who were against it, therefore, had to call themselves Anti-Federalists. This became the debate. And the only way they were going to convince the Anti-Federalists to support this is by giving people more individual freedoms. So I will tell you that there were a series of essays that tried to convince people to support the Constitution. This was called the Federalist Papers. You'll probably read some next year. Madison was the key writer of that. Hamilton was also, and John Jay. And to appease the Anti-Federalists, they included the Bill of Rights. That is your first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Do we have any questions on that before I go to the last topic? Everybody seems okay? All right, I hope you're paying attention, not watching TV. All right, so here we go. Last section is your early republic. So now we have President Washington, followed by President Adams, followed by President Jefferson. You do not need to know all the 10 amendments at all. It'll never be on the AP exam. You just need to, the First Amendment would be the most important one to know. Freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, petition. Okay, so now Washington is president. One of the most consequential decisions he makes is to appoint Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury. I hope I taught him this year. I'm not certain. For those of you watching in Idaho, that was a complete sarcastic joke. I taught Alexander Hamilton in tremendous depth, probably too much because I'm obsessed with the play. He is the Secretary of the Treasury, and his financial plan is to consolidate all debts into one. Remember, some states had debts, others did not. Some people were owed money, others were not. And there are people who think that his plan favored the wealthy. I wish I could spend more time on this, but I can't right now. In order to pay off this national debt, there was an excise tax on whiskey. So we're going to consolidate the debt into one and then start to pay it down. Unlike today, I know some of you are horrified at the national debt clock that we have in the classroom. Then we will also use a protective tariff, a tax on foreign goods to pay off the debt, and we will put all of our money into one central national bank. Very terrified of the debt. Don't be afraid of the debt. I'm sure we're going to start paying it down anytime soon. So this financial plan was very controversial. Jefferson did not like it. Remember, he was a strict interpreter of the Constitution at the time. Hamilton obviously supported it. He was a loose interpreter of the Constitution. He said, doesn't say that I can't create a national bank. And Jefferson said, but it doesn't say that you can. So this really leads to your first two political parties. I'd love for you to remember, in order to get Hamilton's plan passed, Hamilton agreed to move the capital from New York to Washington, D.C. That's how he got Southern support for his plan. Is everybody clear on that? Did you take a screenshot? And are you ready to rock and roll? All right. So now we go to some aspects of Washington's presidency. Oh, I got to wait. Okay. Should I go back to that slide? Let's go back. You got it. I read your mind. I don't have the same comedic influence as the HQ guy, though. He's much funnier. I actually think he's funny. So, no, he did not. Good question. Hamilton did not run for president. That's a great question, actually. Nice job. Any other questions? Oh, I'm good now? You sure? Okay. All right. So let's wrap this up. Let's make sure we know that Washington did issue a proclamation of neutrality, did not want us to get involved in foreign affairs. In a review, there's probably no business talking about Citizen Genet, but I can't help myself. He was the French guy that came over here who tried to disrupt our neutrality. That could be a document for the first section of the test. Jay's Treaty, that did appear on one of the practice tests. So this was with Great Britain, and it with Great Britain, who agreed to leave the Northwest Territory. But remember, we wanted them to stop impressment, and it said nothing about impressment, which was the kidnapping of sailors. And I did teach you that there were some people who actually were so upset with Jay's Treaty that they wanted Washington impeached. By the way, just on a side note, the author of that book, Michael Beschloss, apparently is coming out with a new book all about American foreign policy, and I know that there are a couple of you that will definitely want to read it. All right, remember that whiskey tax? Well, now you have Pennsylvania farmers who were very upset because, and I don't know if every class went over this, they were taking their excess grain and they were, I guess, fermentation, or they were distilling it into alcohol. But now there's a tax on whiskey. So they were upset and they staged a rebellion. But unlike Shays' rebellion, this rebellion was crushed because now we have a military. So with the Whiskey Rebellion shows the strength of the new government. Okay? And then we have the last thing, Washington's farewell address. He warns us against two things: no political parties and no foreign alliances. And of course, you know that we did not listen to him on either of those. Are you good on this slide? And then I can just wrap it up with Adams. And I think we got relatively close to a half an hour. Everybody's good? Beautiful. And then your last one. This is probably me getting too carried away, so don't stress. But the presidency of Adams, we tried to get the French to stop impressing us. We sent over people, representatives there. They wouldn't even allow us to meet. That became known as the XYZ affair. So there was a lot of anti-French sentiment in the country when we came back. And then what Adams did is they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. And this restricted people's rights to criticize the government. And then anonymously, Jefferson and Madison, of course we know now, they wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which said states should have the right to nullify laws. In other words, if they don't like the Alien and Sedition Acts, they should be able to nullify them and just not follow them. And then Jefferson will be elected in 1800. All right, well, I'm happy with the way this went, even though it's difficult for me to minimize the information. But again, it's big picture, so I hope everybody was able to follow it. I think it was well organized. I think you asked great questions. And yes, I can repeat it was better than yesterday. Yeah, that's really just a product of me being more comfortable with the material. It's difficult to teach the colonial history because I like to do things chronologically, and it's just so challenging in the colonial era to do it that way. So I apologize, but we're going to be good to go now. So I'm not trying to make excuses. Anyway, somebody asked me to repeat the XYZ affair. The XYZ affair, we sent representatives to France to try to get them to stop impressing us. And they wanted money just to meet, not even to get the impressment ended. They just said, if you want to meet us, give us money. And our phrase was millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. In other words, we're not going to just give you money for a bribe. And when they came back, there was a lot of anti-French sentiment. So people were really upset, and this actually hurts Jefferson because he was more of a pro-France guy. So in response to that, we passed what's called the we passed what's called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the Alien and Sedition Acts were really going to go after immigrants in America. It was going to go, and immigrants tended to vote for the Democratic Republicans, which was Jefferson's party, who was pro-France. See, I'm getting a little bit too detailed now, so I don't want to distract people. But does that help a little bit? Alyssa, is that what you wanted? Okay. And just so you know, the 3 people we sent, if you're interested, I'm not sure if you are, but it was John Marshall, who was later the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Charles Pinckney, and Elbridge Gerry. And I would love for you to know the name Elbridge Gerry. Yes, they were the 3 sent to France, but I would love for you to know the name Elbridge Gerry. I don't remember if I taught you guys gerrymandering this year, but it's something you should absolutely be familiar with. And if I didn't do it, I will definitely teach it after the AP exam. It's the redrawing of districts in a very odd shape that resembles a salamander to get a certain political party elected. And it's named after Elbridge Gerry because he's the first one that did it. Guys, I could talk all night, and I'm willing to stay, but there's also a lot of basketball games on that I'd like to get to. How did this work for everybody? Give me a sign-off or a all good, and we should be good to go. There's no need for you. All right, thumbs up, good, perfect. Thanks again. I'm really happy with the way this is working, and we got 6 more to go. So good job. No need for you to stay because I am going to edit this on my own. Have a great night, everyone, and I will see you in